would love to meet anybody other than Keir Starmer and his cronies who actually supports this ridiculous giveaway of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. Oh, wasn't even a giveaway. We're paying to hand over sovereign territory to a country that pallies up and has been doing military exercises with one of our worst enemies. Well, worst enemy to some of us, not Sir Keir Starmer. He loves the place. He can't wait to send more ministers over to Beijing to shake hands and do all sorts of dodgy deals. What is the man thinking? I'm pretty sure that Tom Tugendhat, former security minister, is going to agree with us that this wasn't a good idea at all, was it, Tom?
No, Alex, it wasn't. And I'm not even slightly surprised to hear your views on this. Look, the reality is what we've just done is we haven't just handed over some islands and decided that we're going to pay effectively the winter fuel allowance for more than 300,000 pensioners a year to pay for it, which is pretty extraordinary. We've also conceded that Mauritius has the right to be informed of our military operations. Wow, is all I can say to that. We wouldn't accept that for any other country. I see absolutely no reason we should be accepting it for Mauritius. We'd only do that if we were in a very close alliance relationship, US perhaps, or France, somebody like that. But you know what? The extraordinary thing is it's even worse than that, Alex, because the reality is what they've also done is they've effectively conceded that these courts that were set up deliberately, very deliberately by our predecessors, people like Churchill and so on, and Attlee, Labour and Conservative, they were set up in order to dispute between countries, but not between Commonwealth countries. They've conceded that effectively that's exactly what the court can do. Now, do you think that it's going to stop in Mauritius? No, of course it's not. Of course it's not. Because what China and Russia have discovered since the 1980s is that there are two ways of undermining us. One is you launch an attack. That's what Argentina tried in 1982 in the Falkland Islands. And the second way is you launch legal action. And this is effectively a kind of warfare. We call it lawfare, where you use the law to attack the United Kingdom, to undermine our strategic interests and to leave us weaker. I'm afraid that is exactly what the Starmer government has just conceded to. It's appalling.
I don't understand, Tom, why America went along with this. I thought there would be an 11th hour Trump intervention saying, what on earth do you think you're doing? That's our military base as well. But they kind of apparently said, oh, well, we've looked at the detail and actually this has to happen. What am I missing?
So, first of all, the US doesn't really care, right? For the US, this is an air base in the Indian Ocean that's 1,300 miles away from, well, anywhere else, pretty much. It's about 1,000 miles away from the Seychelles, 1,300 miles away from Mauritius. As far as the US is concerned, they've got the aircraft carriers and the fleet to defend it. They don't really care what others are going to do. They can operate from it. And any idea that the International Telecoms Union, this sort of international treaty body that comes under the UN, is going to stop them using the electromagnetic spectrum or anything like that, it's complete rubbish. I mean, it's total rubbish. And so the Americans are just looking at it and going, well, does it keep it for 100 years? Yeah, fine, whatever. You know, they don't really care. For us, it's a very different deal, because actually for us, this is effectively the erosion of our sovereignty. Now, that's very different. If you're an American, this is just a property deal. They maintain their rent. It doesn't matter. For us, this is a very, very big change. It's not only about the money. The money is important. This is hundreds of thousands of pensions, winter fuel. This is, I don't know, 20,000 prison places, something like that. It's several thousand nurses' salaries. I mean, it's a huge amount of money. It is actually, much more importantly, this is a direct attack on our ability to defend our interests and to stand up for them. And I'm afraid this is, frankly, the bureaucracy of surrender, the bureaucracy of defeat, and we are going along with it, and it is completely unacceptable.
Are you concerned about this government's seeming obsession with China? Because they've been in power for about a year, and you've already had one of the first visits done by Rachel Reeves was to Beijing. Then David Lammy wormed his way over there. Apparently Jonathan Reynolds has got his tickets booked, and Sir Keir Starmer made it very clear when he became Prime Minister that he really wanted to go and have a big state visit to China. First Prime Minister in 7 years to do so. Meanwhile, Ed Miliband seems to be writing boundless cheques over to Beijing to use slaves to make all sorts of infrastructure that even the former head of MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove, has written today in The Independent. China can hack these systems. They can mess with the energy grid. And this government seems to just go deaf and blind to security briefings and the integrity of being able to defend ourselves and go scuttling off to China at a moment's notice. Does that alarm you?
So, Alex, you're speaking as though it's theoretical. This isn't theoretical. Did you see what happened in Spain only a few weeks ago? Did you see their phone lines went down only a few days ago? Look, the reality is we know, this isn't academic, this isn't supposition, we know that there are kill switches in solar panels. Now, you may say, OK, well, so what? It's just, it's just one solar panel. No, all of them, right? That could easily bring down a third of the grid. That could easily bring down a vast amount of power. Now, at the same time, Ed Miliband is absolutely refusing to invest in our energy security by making sure that we have sovereign capabilities out of the North Sea. That's oil and gas and things like that. We should be striking deals with Alberta and with, frankly, actually with Quebec as well, where there are huge energy reserves, so that we actually have dependable, reliable energy sources from a partner nation that we can absolutely rely on, like Canada. Instead, what's the government doing? Oh, yeah, it's sucking up to China. Now, you just need to read some of the stuff that I've been writing about. Recently, John Beck's book, forgive me, I can't remember the title, but John Beck's book about the oppression of the Uyghurs and the way in which these factories are supported is absolutely horrific. What we're seeing is slave labor turning into energy in our fields, and it's tearing up our energy security. It's also tearing up our food security. This is completely ridiculous, and the policies that are being followed are like some sort of ideological pathology, as though somehow or other, if you believe in it even more, it will make it true. It doesn't make it true. It's not true. It's leaving Britain more vulnerable, and I'm afraid the lessons from Spain in the last few weeks are pretty stark.
I mean, I knew you used to do some funny old stuff in the security services, but I didn't realise you had a camera over my back, so I've just written the words food security on my bit of paper. Why do they think that actually papering over agricultural land with, big plastic sheets of solar panels that aren't really going to do anything positive for the grid is a good idea, when actually hostile states such as China have a completely different policy, which is we now have to be 100% food self-sufficient, and we're like, well, we're only 60% now, let's decimate farming at the same time. It's all playing into the hands of our enemies.
It completely, and it's not even a green agenda. Now, I don't know about you, Alex, but I actually do think we need to have a greener future. I do think we need to get off the carbon economy in order to improve our energy security. But the way we do that is by making sure that transition works for us. It's not by simply shoving every job out of the United Kingdom into China, where actually, guess where their power comes from? That's right, coal, right? So the idea that these are somehow green products, well, they're green when they arrive in Kent or when they arrive in the UK, but they're not green when they're made. They're made with the same carbon power that generates carbon dioxide gases and all the rest of it. That unless you believe in some weird basis of scientific nationalism, I'm afraid it affects us all. So it's complete rubbish. What we've got to be doing is making sure that this transition works, protects British jobs, and actually does deliver the change and the innovation that we need to see. Now, we can do it, but we can't do it if the only way in which we're going to do that is by handing jobs to China, by closing down our own industry, and by leaving the British people unemployed. That's completely ridiculous.
You must be pretty pleased, actually, that Donald Trump seems to now be barking orders at Sir Keir Starmer. I mean, J.D. Vance tried to have a subtle word about putting people in clink for writing tweets. Donald Trump has now written on Truth Social, our negotiated deal with the United Kingdom is working out well for all. Thank you, the Donald. I strongly recommend to them, however, that in order to get their energy costs down, they stop with the costly and unsightly windmills and incentivise modernised drilling in the North Sea, where large amounts of oil lay waiting to be taken. UK's energy costs would go way down and fast. And that's at the crux of all of this, because we're a miserable country with failing manufacturing. We can't afford our health service because its bills are through the roof. The cost of energy affects absolutely everything. And it's not even just about our own energy security. If we manage to get into a position where we could become an exporter, it wields a huge amount of diplomatic leverage as well, doesn't it?
Well, that's exactly right. And look, our energy costs are 7 times that of the United States and about 4 times that of Europe. If you look at France, they invested in nuclear energy throughout the 1970s and 80s. And guess what? generates, I think it's about 70–80% of their power now. And so their power costs are much, much lower. We've got to invest massively in nuclear. We've got to get over this planning rubbish that has meant that we've got this fish disco that's costing a fortune for the Hinkley Point reactor. We've got to make sure that we are investing in the carbon energy that we need and the alliances with countries like Canada that would actually generate that security. And that's the way that we get growth going, because, you know, it's bad enough that Rachel Reeves has put a tax on everybody's job with her NI rises. It's bad enough that she's chasing farmers and small businesses into bankruptcy courts by making sure that they simply can't pass on their assets between generations, which is, after all, what small businesses always do. What they're actually doing is they're taxing all of us into oblivion by simply refusing to allow us to have cheap energy. Cheap energy, I'm afraid, is the single, fundamental, absolutely essential for every single economic, prosperous economy. It is fundamental. There is no other word for it.
Is Donald Trump right to actually intervene, though, or should he just let us get on with making our own mistakes?
Look, I'm not going to say anything about another country's head of state for the simple reason I don't want them to say stuff about ours. I want a British Prime Minister who stands up for Britain. I want a British Prime Minister who says that the interests of the British people come first. I want a British Prime Minister who says that the jobs and the hopes and the aspirations of British people today and in the future are what he is driven by. Instead, we've got some sort of ideologue and his extraordinary church of the sort of the new left and the new green and sort of some sort of watermelon cathedral that's going on around him. It's completely nuts, and I'm afraid we're all paying for it, and that's the reality.
I just want to ask you about something else, actually, because I don't think it's had enough airtime, quite frankly, but astonishing remarks made by Jonathan Hall-Casey at RUSI about foreign interventions, essentially, subversion into the UK. I mean, when Germany binned off all their nuclear power stations, there have been various reports which suggest that a lot of Russian activism and propaganda helped to move the needle to force Germany to make that decision, which was catastrophic for their energy security. And Jonathan Hall-Casey has pretty much said, if I were a hostile state, I would be filling the airwaves with, ooh, climate catastrophe. We must not have any gas and oil. Isn't that dangerous? Yeah, go on Extinction Rebellion, glue yourself to something. Or I don't know what a woman is. Or, oh no, BLM. We're so racist in this country. He actually has come out. He's the one advising the government, come out and said so much of this toxic stuff is being spoon-fed to us via hostile states. And yet the Labour Party just don't seem to get that memo.
Look, I think Jonathan Hall is a fantastic public servant. I mean, he's an independent lawyer who advises the government on various aspects of terrorism and state interference and things like that. I think he's doing a fantastic job, and that speech is one of the most important speeches given by a public security official in a very long time. Look, sedition is specifically one of the things that is on the Security Service Act 1989, so that the security services can actually face off this challenge. You know, we wouldn't have said, oh, you know, the communists are fine with their ideas, but they're not really a threat in the 70s, would we? We wouldn't have said the fascists are okay in the 40s. We would not have done that at all. We would have targeted the propaganda, we'd have targeted the message, we'd have targeted the politics of it, because we knew the threat it was to us. Well, today, guess what? It hasn't finished. Sedition is not over. And the kind of propaganda we're getting out of TikTok on Chinese web apps and things like that, the kind of propaganda that we're getting out of the so-called Internet Research Agency, as it used to be called, it's now got various other different names, out of Moscow is a continuation of it. And by the way, we're also getting it out of different groups out of the Middle East, some things very, very closely aligned to the organizations like the Muslim Brotherhood. And it's a real problem. We've got to make sure that the division in our society is not encouraged. You know, we know that this country, this amazing country that we are lucky to be part of, has done a brilliant job at including many, many people. You know, you may like or may not like Rishi Sunak, but the fact that he was of Indian origin was utterly irrelevant. He was the British Prime Minister. You may like his politics, you may not like his politics. Kemi Badenoch, you may like her politics, you may not like her politics, but nobody cares about the fact that she was born in the UK of a Nigerian family. I mean, that's utterly irrelevant. You know, this is a country that has welcomed and included many, many people. We've had a Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, who's done a brilliant job, incredibly courageously standing up for the UK against many different forms of extremism. The fact that he's a British Muslim, who cares? You know, this is a fantastic country, and all that spread of division is utterly rubbish.
Really quick question, because I do have to go to break, but I've got to ask you this. I was speaking to Robert Midgley earlier, who's from the Friends of the British Overseas Territories and also used to work in the Foreign Office, and he suggested that before he became Prime Minister, Starmer had an all-expenses-paid trip to Mauritius. Do you trust him? Do we need to be looking into some of his connections?
Look, I think he's made some pretty staggeringly awful decisions, but let's look at the context in which he's made them. He's made them at a time when actually we've got an entire department that seems to be much more interested in sucking up drinks parties and looking good at the international legal circuit in the UN and in New York and in The Hague, rather than standing up for Britain's interests. So you're absolutely right that the end of this process has been Keir Starmer signing on the dotted line and signing the surrender document. But the reality is this has been built up over years and years and years. And only a good foreign secretary like David Cameron was able to stop it. But I'm afraid the pressure of the administration has been continuous. And all that Keir Starmer has done is demonstrated that he's weak.
Tom, it's wonderful catching up with you, one of my favourite MPs. I know I'm not supposed to have favourites, but I do like Tom. Tom Tugendhat, ladies and gentlemen.